Who is this man? What's he standing in front of? I'm Paradox2767, and I'm about to show you. Today, friends, we are making a diorama of none other than Graceland, the home of King Elvis himself. To start out, I wanted to make the base on which the building would be constructed, so I started with this giant panel of wood. I'm super unexperienced when it comes to saw work and things like that, so you can see me here using a great example of safe cutting, I'm sure. The board I'm cutting is a piece of the set to a play me and my wife put on and took on a tour, seeing much of America with the play on that road trip. And I'm cutting it up here as sort of a symbolic base to Elvis's home, because while we were on that road trip, the van that we were living in for that year was pretty much our home, and this set was like one of the many things crammed in the van with us. And so this is a little panel of our home, if that makes any sense. So now it's going to be Elvis's home too. How do you like that? My wife is currently on a huge bike ride from Milwaukee to Minneapolis. So from my hometown to hers, it's about 350 miles, which she says should take her about a week. But while she's gone, I thought I'd make a model to surprise her with when she gets back. And it's got a lot to do with coming home, this model. So I think it fits perfect. On our last night home, we watched, of course, Elvis, the movie, in theaters. My fifth time, her third, which is a record for both of us. And because I think I was with her, I was really looking a lot at Elvis and Priscilla's relationship, and I was enjoying that a lot. I'm actually cutting two pieces to size, and I'm gonna go ahead and glue them together here because I want the base to be a little thicker. So once I got that done and all stuck down with a plant, it was time to sort of match the size as best as I could. Not very good with wood tools and stuff, so that's, evidenced by what you're seeing here. Trying to sort of cut off pieces as best I could with the saw and trying to kind of pair the pieces down so that they sort of matched. In an earlier video, I talked about how the movie's book ended in a way with Priscilla's statement to Elvis, "If you can dream it, you can do it." This time I realized, she's really talking about Hollywood specifically in that part, because in their first scene together, he's talking about wanting to break into Hollywood movies, and she says that to him, and she gives him the same advice, though again reversed at the end there when they're talking about movies again in that fateful car scene, and he talks about how he was never in a movie, and she talks about, hey, you can get clean, and I think she's also saying, if you can dream it, do it. You can do whatever you want with your life. Who knows? There could be a classic movie in your story, which ended up, of course, not being the case, but very interesting. After that, it was a matter of going ahead and grabbing some sandpaper and trying to get at it and shave it down further so that they were, the two halves of the base sort of matched. But after a lot of sanding, I realized there's a reason they made power tools, so I hit it with a sander I found in our basement. So got a pad on that and went back and forth several times all over that base to really get it flattened down. Took several passes and a few more times with the saw, but eventually, it was starting to look pretty good. Another thing I noticed is that first scene with Priscilla has sort of a slow version of the song "Can't Help Falling in Love with You." I forget the actual name of the song, if that's not it, but it's a slower version that's by a female vocalist, kind of a pretty rendition of that song. And similarly, on our last scene with Elvis, it's a slow version with a female vocalist of the song "Suspicious Minds." We're caught in a trap. They're singing that while he's meeting with Priscilla. And then that first song comes in again. The slow version of "I Can't Help Falling in Love with You" comes back in as Elvis is getting on the plane. So Baz Luhrmann did a good job of using music there to call back to their first scene together, I thought. So once the sides were sort of matched up well, and the corners were rounded, I wanted to fill in some of the gaps. One of the boards had some holes through it, just for pieces of the set's construction, and those I filled in with some wood filler, as well as the seams around the outside, so it kind of looked like sort of like some sort of crazy strawberry sandwich while it was curing, if that makes any sense. Next up, I went back to an old board game of mine, James Bond. I had another copy, and the back of that box was used on another Elvis diorama I did. You can check that out on my page, but I thought of this game again for this project because I happen to know of a game piece that I thought would work well for this. One of them little mini James Bonds that come in in the box, and I figure James is cool, Elvis is cool, that'll pretty much work. So I found one that was roughly skin tone. Don't worry, I've got like kind of 2 Elvis games in one box, so I've got plenty of pieces here. So it's no sweat to use one of them. I tried to break the first one off kind of clumsily, didn't work, and I ended up breaking off Elvis's shoes. So instead I took a razor to another piece, and that was looking pretty smart. Had to get Elvis's hair to be black, so I went ahead with a Sharpie and colored that in. And then I was wondering what kind of suit he'd have on, and I thought, let me just go with a classic white suit. That was inspired, as was the other model video of Elvis I did, by his sort of comeback special. I thought that would look pretty well. Basically just a white suit with a little bit of a red tie. So got the white suit ready, the red tie ready, and Elvis was looking handsome. For the main portion of the building, I used a Cream City brick, which Milwaukee is famous for. It's called the Cream City. I got it from this chimney that's no longer in use in my attic apartment, so I took that to work with. I started with a toothbrush and some soap to try to scrub that baby clean because, you know, like Graceland, the Cream City brick usually is like a nice yellowy tan color, but after a lot of scrubbing, I really realized that was not the trick. So instead, I decided to sand it. First off, I had to get the cat out of the apartment because I wasn't sure whether brick dust was good for tiny little cat noses and lungs. So I got that taken care of, and then I hit it with a sander. Cream City brick can be a couple different shades of yellow depending on where in the rivers of Wisconsin the limestone was mined, if that makes sense. This is a rough history guide from a non-expert you're hearing, but basically, based on depending on your distance from the mouth of the river, it would have a different type of sediment of limestone, and you'd get different sort of shades of yellow. So as a general rule, the further you get from the coast, the gradient of the Cream City bricks will shift. And I don't know if Graceland is made of Cream City literally, but it's certainly made out of a lighter colored brick. So, I mean, it wouldn't really surprise me because I doubt Milwaukee's the only place it's used. Anyway, I shaved it clean on all 4 sides. You can kind of see that color coming out. This is another sort of symbolic choice to use this brick because, you know, whereas the set piece was certainly my home for a good year there, my other home is my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So by including this in the diorama, I'm really making both Elvis's house and mine in some sense. On my latest viewing, I was really paying attention to some of the lyrics of Elvis's songs. What's been one of my favorites since I saw the film the first time is that Unchained Melody take. And the lyrics of that are pretty interesting when you consider what he's singing about. That lonely river is flowing toward the open arms of the sea, and it's crying, "Wait for me, wait for me." That's sort of the premise of the story, or the story of that song. And when you think about it, you know, if the lonely river isn't at the sea now, he'll never be. The sea is that river's rock of eternity. It's what that river's working for, you know, meaning to its life. And so our version in this model of that sea is Elvis coming home to Priscilla in Graceland. And so, you know, it's tragic because just picture a sad little stream screaming, "Wait for me!" But, you know, it's too late, dude. You'll never get to that sea. But at the same time, it's a very pretty, you know, it's a pretty thought. So I really like those lyrics. Our strawberry sandwich was dry eventually, so I sanded that down. Then it was another squirt of strawberry to really fill in those tiny gaps and to be put aside for later. Now it was time to figure out the layout of the building that is Graceland. So I took the brick and I took some measurements from it to be compared with the actual measurements of the Graceland house. I pulled that up on Wikimedia Commons, and I sort of took the measurements based on that. Lucky for me, the dimensions of the brick fit well and with those of the building. You can see that light green rectangle represents the exact size of the brick. So I got pretty lucky. That's the facade of Graceland roughly matches that of a Cream City brick. Now you know that trivia. So this is just me kind of using the application here to figure out the sizes of the doors and windows and shutters and things like that. Because Graceland is in the National Register of Historic Places, this image is maybe owned by like the estate of Graceland, or, you know, if it's owned by the photographer. It's certainly not, I didn't take it, I'll put it that way. All these are from Wikimedia Commons, so you can certainly find them there yourself. Once I had my dimensions, especially of those windows, I started to get to work. So the window frames were going to be made of a bunch of little toothpicks, which meant I had to cut a lot of toothpicks down to exact size, several of each size. Also on this watch through, I think I may have discovered my new favorite take on an Elvis song in the movie. Before this point, my favorite song in the movie was definitely Elvis's take on Unchained Melody. You know, at the end there, and they've got sort of a montage and they shoot back to young Elvis running towards the gospel music of his hometown. By the way, that actor who did a fabulous job in the movie, me and my wife scored an interview with him for our magazine Wishbone, and that interview is going to be online very shortly. Once Veronica's back into town, she knows how to do that more than me. But keep an eye out on the description of this video, because we'll have that interview linked very shortly. Eventually, I was able to finally get all of those toothpicks cut and ready to glue together. This was the hardest probably part of the project, to be honest, just because it was a little finicky. But basically every window is made of two vertical bars and 3 horizontal ones, and there's about 5 different window sizes, or 6 I believe, in the project. I ended up making over 30 windows and 1 door, so yeah, it was a ball. But anyway, so that was always a favorite song of mine. With my 5th viewing of the movie, however, I discovered another great take on a song, and I think it was a very smart use of this song. It's the song Crawfish, which on the surface is just sort of a simple, goofy song about cleaning crawfish out. It's the first song in the movie King Creole, but where they used it and the way it's sung, I loved a lot. So you'll hear this song, and I didn't even realize it at first. It was only after appreciating the song a lot and then coming back, listening to a bunch of Elvis and hearing that same sort of ear candy of the music again, I was like, oh wait, that song was in the movie. So it's at the part where Elvis has just been drafted, basically, and it's right before the scene where he's about to get his hair cut and he's about to be shipped over to Germany. And his mom's freaking out, and they're all like arguing and sort of freaking out about it. And Elvis, played by Austin Butler, of course, is slowly playing Crawfish, sadly, on their couch in the background during that scene. If you listen to the lyrics of that song, it's about a crawfish who's getting stripped and cleaned before your eyes, it says. And there's a sweet, neat look, fresh and ready to cook. And now take him in your hand, he's going to look good in your frying pan. And I thought that, it talks about crisping him up and boiling that crawfish, and it fits perfectly with what's happening in Elvis's life at that point, because he probably feels, having been drafted and having had his exciting career sort of hijacked a bit by the Colonel and by the media, I think he probably feels a lot like a crawfish there himself. You know, he himself is getting stripped and cleaned right before the audience's eyes when he's getting his hair cut short and getting shipped over to Germany. He's treated like basically a hunk of meat. So I thought that was a very smart use of that song, and I really like it, and I really love how it songs. It's an amazing song originally. Definitely ought to check that out, but listen for it in the film as well. That's my new favorite song in Elvis. So with one window made, I went ahead and did the same thing, like I said, about 30 times, and I set those aside for later. Then I wanted to work on the front panel of the house itself. So it looks in the photo as though it's a plain cream city facade on Graceland, save for the section where the front door is. It's sort of a panel of white. I used some nice wood glue just to sort of stick everything together. I went ahead and filled those in because, it was going to be pretty visible being the front of the build, with some more strawberry jam, and I got that aside for later. In the meantime, it was time to paint some of those windows. Not quite tan, but white instead. So I got to work on painting all 34 maybe of those windows and that one door there. Once the strawberry jam was dried, then I hit that with a sander to really smooth it out. Then a little paint later kind of finished the job on that front. Next, it was time to figure out who was going to be standing in the front door. This is actually Priscilla, which will kind of get into the lore of the diorama, I guess. So Priscilla's going to be in our front door, basically waiting for Elvis to come home. So how I was going to do this is basically just take a Sharpie and darken all the area around the person of Priscilla, and then I was going to put by putting the door and stuff in front of that, it would look like the house is dark inside and sort of just the outline of Priscilla is visible. I got that finished, filled in with the Sharpie, and then so as you can see, once the door is in place and some more of the fixtures, things were looking pretty sharp. That was my new method as far as the windows are concerned. Figuring out where they go, then removing them quick, coloring them, and filling that part in with black Sharpie, just to make it look like there's a little bit more substance to the windows, and then, calling that a day. And there was also the matter of some vertical posts you can see in the actual Graceland. So I got those painted and glued into place, and that was looking pretty handsome. Like I said, I used the same method for all the windows, basically just putting a black square behind where the window was going to sit. So I went around, measured everything, and filled in the entire building with where the windows were going to go. On this side, I left a little bit of a gap for an eventual chimney, which will be dealt with much later. And with those bricks in place, we are pretty much ready to get those windows on and glued down. So this is when the building really started taking shape. We have the front there, which looks pretty accurate to some of the photos I've seen. It's obviously a little bit, I guess, wonky basically, but the idea is I decided into a little further into the project when it did start taking on sort of a bent up shape. I'm, a newbie at this sort of thing, and I'm not more as interested in perfection as I am in visual interest, so it's more of a folk art attempt at Graceland, I guess, than anything, or an outsider art attempt. I use another photo of Graceland I've just found online to take some measurements for, the depth of that overhanging roof. Then I got some pieces cut out for the main part of the roof, kind of jumping around in areas of the build wherever my attention span took me, if that makes sense. So I got things cut out for that to be dealt with later. Then I got a bunch of pieces cut out for what would be the two roof pieces, and using a few pieces of tape and a ruler, I got those kind of straightened up and lined up and placed. So I'm placing it on the tape so that they stick firmly, and then once those are all in place, I hit it with a lot of wood glue to sort of seal the whole deal, and eventually take the tape off. That was sort of how I got a single thin panel that was going to be one half of the large piece of the roof, and I'd do the same thing twice for the other half. So everything's basically curing in this shot. I've got a few different roof panels and things to be cut down, and then I've got the larger roof panels there to be dealt with soon. Next up, I wanted to work on that little overhang, so I cut out a box to size, and I got a few side pieces glued down to make sort of 3/4 of a box. And once that was dry, I added a roof to it and a triangle piece and painted the whole thing white. And that'll make a little bit more sense once it's on the actual model. Next up, I wanted to paint the roofs. I did find some more black paint in our basement, shaking it to stir it. I've heard you're not supposed to, but I don't really know why, so I went ahead and did so. Got some black paint and added a little bit of my white, just because I didn't want it quite pure black roof. A lot of the photos I saw, it's sort of a dark gray, so that's kind of what I went with, and I think it came out just as I expected. So I got both halves of those roofs painted and put aside to be glued down a little later. Next up, it was a matter of sizing and cutting up all of the window shutters I would need. So it wasn't quite the width of a popsicle stick, so I had to split a lot of those by just maybe a couple 16ths of an inch. And then I got those all cut to size. I think there ended up being about 30 different shutters to be installed. So I got those all lined up and painted green. My green is a green I had plus a little bit of black because it was a little too light for my taste based on photographs I saw online. So I was getting all those painted. Now, I saw some other photos. You can look up the back of Graceland, and it's a very simple sort of back with no shutters, simple windows, and things like that. So I wanted to go ahead and leave it like that. I thought it was sort of symbolically interesting if you think about a very flashy, interesting front, but a more simple, maybe behind the scenes look. Sort of seems a little bit like Elvis himself, so I was, happy to have that included in my build as well. It's not an exact model, of course, of Graceland. I simplified it if you look at photos to side buildings and things like that because I only had the one Cream City brick. Now, in I think maybe their second last scene together, Elvis and Priscilla split up in the film. And basically, it's because of his continuing drug use, his worsening drug use, and she says, she needs a husband, not a rock star, basically, and leaves him crying on the steps of Graceland. And I love that scene in all 5 of my reviews of the film, but that is sort of what inspired this build. Once she tells Elvis it's time that she left him, he tells her, hey, listen, when I'm 50 and you're 40, we're going to be together again. I promise, you'll see. He says that. And, as an audience member, knowing the history of Elvis, it's obviously a very tragic line because he's saying, I'm busy now, but I'll get my life together. I'll change. Things will be great someday. And so, not wanting to let history make a liar out of Elvis, I decided to make this model based on a fictional Graceland of 1985. The year Elvis would have been 50 and Priscilla 40. So essentially what I'm making here is a sort of fake history where, Elvis got what he wanted. He is in this model. He's going to be coming home to Priscilla at last and getting what he wants. It's basically his version of heaven, you know. If I think Elvis's version of heaven might have been a lot like coming home to a peaceful life at Graceland, having, you know, accomplished all he wanted in his life. So we're getting the king what he wants in this here video, and I think he'd be proud to hopefully see it. So once those were all ready and dried, I got those all glued into place, and you know, the front continued to look more and more like the king's home. If you're interested in hearing any more of my ramblings on Elvis, feel free to check out my official Elvis review on my YouTube channel, and then my other two like diorama videos, one of Elvis, one of Lilo and Stitch. Those are just basically platforms for me to continue discussing the movie. So if you're like me and you love talking and hearing about this movie, go ahead and check out my other page. Then it was time to get that front hanging piece in place a little bit. So I set it up to see how it would look, and I was going to use a dowel I found at the store here to sort of get 4 of those pillars you'll see on photographs of Graceland, get those in place and keeping the roof from falling in. So I got those cut to size and painted white, and I started sort of gluing everything in. Then it was time to get the main roof up. I've got these triangles that are the sides of the roof. I'm not painting them or anything at all because that's as close as I figured I could get anyway to the Cream City color. You know, it's technically brick, but for us it's popsicle stick, and I'm happy with how that turned out. But I needed these little feet basically to give them a kickstand to stand and get a place to glue onto our brick to form those sides of the roof. So I got those in place with a little bit of wood glue, let those cure, and we were ready for a roof. The back piece went on pretty easily, and then the front piece just needed a little bit more finicky, like cut downs and things like that, so we could slot into that overhang and fit nicely with the other half of the roof. And then I got that down and all glued into place. After taking some measurements, I also got a good size on the pieces of that overhang's roof. So I got those in place to see how they fit in. They looked good, so I had to paint those a little later, as well as a main beam to go over the whole spine of the roof, if that makes any sense. So once that was painted, got that spine in place, and that was looking pretty handsome. Then I found out it was time to give Elvis a bit of a change of clothes, actually. I was reading this magazine that my mom picked me up at the store on Elvis, and the part about his funeral, as you can see there, talks about him wearing a white suit with a light blue shirt and white tie. And because this build is a sort of fantasy land post Elvis's death, I thought it would be sort of fitting for him to be wearing that same suit when he came into, I guess, his version of heaven. If that makes sense. So basically it was time to give that boy a blue shirt. And there he is, looking much more appropriate for this event. And then with roof pieces properly painted, I got those glued into place, and we were getting close to the finish line. On the side, like I said, there was going to be a chimney, but because a normal popsicle stick was a little short for it, I went ahead and used the lengths of a few different popsicle sticks and glued those in place along with the sides to give the chimney a little bit of depth. And once that was up, it was glued in place along with a little bit of extra detailing there. There was one more chimney to add after that, and that was a little further down on the roof, which is just a simple little piece I made here, similar to the other chimney's design, just a basically an open box with a little rim on the top. Then it was time to go back all the way to that base and get that spray painted black. I'm no expert with the spray paint, so I did what I could and kind of gave it a good first coat there. Then I hit the bottom really quick just to sort of complete the piece, and then I did the front again and again to make it really stick out as black. And if you got any nicks or anything, hopefully it'll stay black. Then with a few extra window pieces I had, I went ahead and installed a few skylights in our angled sort of roof attic there to bring in a little bit more light than that, which we already have. And then it was time to go ahead and place the king's home. So I got that in place, backed it up a little bit. It was bigger than I realized, and I was super excited by this point. The only things that were left were to place the front door. That Priscilla's just opened wide to greet the king. And then, of course, to place Elvis himself, who's just come home from a long journey. And then lastly, a last little touch, I've got something here from Things Remember to store at our mall. I think it's pretty much a national chain. I went ahead and had them make a little panel plate for me to sort of complete and label the piece. So it was just a matter of getting that in place with a bit of a measuring. And once that was in, it was time at last to show off. This video, like the other model videos, is brought to you by the Zodiac Dozen. Working now on book 8. Things are getting exciting. So if you want, I can link to that in the description below. I'm super thrilled with how this piece came out. I hope I did the king proud. I really came to love how the imperfections of the brick and the imperfections of my cuts and glue job all sort of, to me, enhance the piece, and I'm really proud to put it on our mantle and excited to surprise my wife with it when she herself comes home.